Okay, so scene 3. I just want to go over it briefly before you watch the clip of the stage version that I wanted to show you today, because I want to play 1, 2, and 3 so that you can see all of them. So scene 3 shifts again. Remember we said every time a scene is a new scene, it's a different location, different characters. We're supposed to mentally take ourselves out of that last moment and put ourselves in a new scenario. So scene 3 has Laertes. Who's he? The one that's returning to France. He's the son of Polonius. Very good. It's important at the beginning to say the names a lot so that you get used to them and how to pronounce them and how to spell them, because in the text they just abbreviate. So you're going to have to know the spelling of the names. Laertes is hard for people sometimes, and so is Claudius. All right, so Laertes and Ophelia are together. She's his sister, it says right there, so siblings. Laertes, we know, is going back to France, and so he's getting everything packed. He's leaving that day to go back to France. It's either that same day as the previous scene or the next day, something really close by in time, because he's taking off. And before he goes, he says, I want to talk to you about something here on line 5. He says, I want to talk to you about Hamlet. And he doesn't really know how to talk to her about it because she's his sister. But Hamlet and Ophelia have been having a relationship. And it's bothering Laertes. He says, the trifling of his favor, hold it of fashion, and a toy in blood. It's perfume, not a real relationship. So he kind of expresses that her relationship is not real. She didn't really like that because obviously she wants to have a relationship with the Prince of Denmark, who wouldn't. But he says, I just feel like you need to understand that he's a guy and he's dating you now and he says things to you now. Perhaps he even loves you now, on line 14. But, he's trying to break it to her, his concern, gently. Brother who cares for his sister will do that. But he says his will is not his own, yeah. The problem is that he's not free to marry anybody he wants. So even though he's pretending that he loves you, he's giving you gifts, he's seeking your affection and all of that, he isn't going to be able to choose who he marries. He's a prince who's going to have to marry, the princess of somewhere else in order to strategically set up a governmental, alliance. He can't, like other unvalued persons, just marry whoever he wants. So he says, then if he says he loves you, you should really think about that, because maybe he's just trying to get something out of you. He doesn't really know how to say it, because what he means is her virginity. He says, sister, I need you to guard he calls it a chaste treasure. Right here, right? So he feels like it's important enough to have this, sort of uncomfortable conversation with her. You can't listen to his songs and believe everything he says, because he's just trying to lure you to sleep with him, and he's going to move on to somebody else. Even if he says he loves you, even if he says we'll get married, he can't, and you know that he can't. So don't fall for it, basically. Right? Yeah. And he's even though he's being tender with her and trying to explain his perspective and warn her, he kind of talks around it, because he doesn't want to go and say, don't give it up to Hamlet, right? And so he uses some war metaphors. He'll say stuff like, keep you out in the rear of your affection, right? In the back of the battle, out of the shot and danger of desire, right? Just be friends with him or whatever, but I just think you shouldn't think you're going to have a relationship with him, because it's not going to work out the way you want. Right? And so he says, just be careful. And Ophelia says, well, fine, I'll take your advice. But, next page is page 19. You don't get to tell me the way to get to heaven by being virginal and then go around in France acting like a reckless libertine. Double standard, right? She says, I know why you're over there in France. All those loose ladies over there, the French ooh la la, right? So if you're going to tell me that, then you can't be the guy who's trying to prey on women over there in France, if you don't want anybody to prey on your sister.
So basically be like the Hamlet too.
Right. That's basically what she's saying. You're being like Hamlet, leading these women on in order to sleep with them, and you're not going to marry any of them either. So don't pretend like you're not implicated in this whole scenario. So then what's going to happen in the scene, and I don't want to go through it line by line, but because I think you'll get it when you're watching it if you have a little bit of background. So then Polonius comes in, their father, and he's like, "Oh, Laertes, you need to get going. They're sailing." And before he goes, though, Polonius says, "I'm going to give you all this advice." And there's this long speech on page 19 and 20 where he gives this advice to Laertes. He says a lot of famous things that you've heard before, like neither a borrower nor a lender be. That, if you've ever heard that before, that comes from this play. He gives him all this advice, don't enter into quarrels, spend your money on quality things, make sure that you have tried and true friendships. Like, all those things that your parents teach you over a series of years, he crams it into one little speech before Laertes walks out the door. I think it's kind of like the equivalent of when they drop you off at college, if you're going to go away. Like, I feel like the whole way they're going to be saying, now remember, don't forget this, like, don't forget that. You're going to remember, like, and give you, like, the little litany of things that they want you to remember, because there you go, out into the world. So he gives him all this advice, which characterizes Polonius a little bit. He's sort of a busybody. He's involved in, everybody's business. His son is a grown man. And instead, he's like, don't lend anybody any money, there's strangers out there. And that sort of thing. He says, to thine own self be true. That comes from this play too, right? I'm sure you've heard that one before, right? No? It means, be honest to yourself. Be your authentic person. Be yourself. Because then you can't be false to any man. So he leaves, and as soon as Laertes leaves, Polonius seizes on Ophelia. What were you guys talking about? All right. What did he say to you? Line 88. And she's like, well, we were talking about Hamlet. He's like, awesome, because I need to talk to you about Hamlet. He says, that's good. That's good. I've heard that lately you have been spending private time with Hamlet on line 92. Well, they've been spending time on line 92. You can see where it says that on line 92. And you yourself have of your audience been most free and bounteous. So anytime he calls you, you go, and you guys spend private time together. And as a dad, that worries me, because what could be happening in private time? Hamlet Jr. could be happening. Well, Hamlet Jr., Hamlet III could be happening. So he says, I'm going to caution you. Now, Polonius is not as diplomatic as Laertes is. Polonius has to scare her into, keeping her virginity. So he says, what does he tell you? What's between you? He says. And she says, well, he's very nice to me. He gives me gifts, and he's pleasant, and we talk and spend time together, and he's made many tenders of his affection. And Polonius is like, affection? Pooh. He's just pretending, right? You speak like a green girl. Somebody who's green is naive and dumb and makes bad decisions because they don't know any better. You're unsifted. You don't know what's going on around you. Do you believe what he says to you? And she's like, I don't know what I should think. Like, yeah, I did, but apparently he just wants to get into my pants, right? My skirt. I don't know what I should think. And he's like, well, I'll teach you. I'll tell you what to think. Think yourself a baby for having believed him. Right? Like, by now you should know better. Now, the thing is, it's kind of his job to teach her about those things, and he's mad at her about it because there's no mom in this situation. There's no mother to Laertes. We never know what happened to her. She just doesn't exist in the story. So if he's getting mad at her about not knowing how to, recognize when a man's just giving you a line, then it's kind of his fault for not making sure she knew that somehow. Right? Like, if your mom doesn't tell you, your aunties should, right? Somebody should step in and tell you what's what. And she says, no, but he says he loves me, and in an honorable way he has approached me. It's not, disgusting and dirty. He's being on the up and up. He's being very, gentlemanly and responsible. And Polonius is like, yeah, right, of course. He says it's all springes to catch woodcocks. Right? It's just a trap. I do know when the blood burns how prodigal the soul lends the tongue vows. I know that when you're in the middle of a passionate moment, you'll say anything to complete that moment. But he says it's just a trick. And you'll lose your virginity, and he'll move on, and you will have nothing. The reason he says that is because if she's ruined and her virginity is taken and she's not married, then he can't marry her off to anybody of quality. How did they know if they were virginal? They checked. There's two ways you can check. Do you want to know them? You're like, kinda. One is an exam, a physical exam. Because a woman who is still virginal will have her hymen intact on the inside. It's a piece of skin. Right? Sort of like, burglar alarm. Right? So if it's been tampered with, it's broken. And also because when that happens, there's a little bit of blood. So what people would do in the old days is when their daughters got married on the wedding night, they would go up the next morning and get the sheets off the bed and proudly display the bloody sheets out in the window, hanging off the balcony. I know that's weird to us, but they would do that because they're like, look, our daughter was the real deal, right? Like, there she was, now she's married, she was legit. And so he's telling her it's a problem for her because of her emotions, but it's a problem for me because he wants to move up in society, and he can only do that if he can marry her to someone of quality. And if she's ruined, he can't marry her to anybody great, if anybody at all. Right? So he's warning her about that, and also about how things will look, and so on and so forth. And so at the end she says, I shall obey. He says to her that you need to stop talking to Hamlet altogether. Right?
Wow.
I would not, in plain terms, from this time forth, this is at the very end of the scene on page 21, have you so slander any moment leisure as to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet. Look to it. So he's already just telling her straight up. Sort of like a command. All right, so that adds a little bit of a twist to the play, right? A little more complication to the rising action that will come, because she's not supposed to talk to Hamlet anymore. He's forbidden her from talking to him.
So how is she going to tell him?
How's she going to tell him? She just stops answering his call. She just puts him on block. All right, so